Bonsoir, bienvenue à cette première séance du cycle Secret de fabrique de l'Ensapvs, où aujourd'hui on va essayer de faire ça sous un nouveau format. Vous voyez bien qu'on est pas deux ou un autour de la table, donc on est plusieurs autour de la table pour justement mettre vous, les étudiants, en discussion avec nos intervenants. Un nouveau format aussi qui était préparé donc, sur un blog. Donc depuis un mois, vous, les étudiants, vous avez la possibilité de poser des questions aux futurs conférenciers. Et donc aujourd'hui, ici présent, donc un peu aussi comme si on était déjà dans ce que les Anglais appelleraient la post-starship condition, c'est-à-dire après les architectes stars, mais les architectes qui discutent de leur travail avec tout un chacun, ouvert aux curieux. Donc le titre provisoire de cette conférence est donc le Foolproof Normativity. Foolproof Normativity, ça voudrait dire les normativités qui résistent à l'idiot. Résister à l'idiot, c'est-à-dire d'être dans une posture de sécurité absolue, et une fois qu'on est dans cette posture-là, on ne risque plus rien, on n'a plus aucune responsabilité à prendre, nous. Donc, aujourd'hui, nous sommes heureux d'accueillir trois architectes très différents, mais qui, eux, investissent à leur façon, à chaque fois différemment, des normes qu'ils rencontrent. Donc nous avons évidemment les étudiants, et nous avons donc en premier Arno Brandlhuber, qui vient donc de Berlin, Jean-Philippe Vassal, donc de la Cathédrale Vassal, vous connaissez aussi, et last but not least, Florian Hertweg. Florian Hertweg est un architecte qui s'autodéfinit comme un architecte qui écrit, donc qui a une productivité sur plusieurs champs, donc un doctorat de la reconstruction à Berlin après la chute du mur. Depuis 2006, il enseigne la théorie et la pratique de la conception architecturale et urbaine à l'ENSA Paris-Malaquais et à Versailles. Il a été nommé professeur récemment. Il est chercheur du laboratoire de l'école d'architecture Paris-Versailles LEAV. Avec Jamel Clouche et Philippe Potier, il intervient dans le programme interministériel Ignis Mutat Res. Florian Hertweg contribue à de nombreuses publications et à des débats et colloques sur des questions de requalification territoriale et la transition énergétique. En 2013, il publie avec Sébastien Marot, un ami, chez Lars Müller Publisher, une réédition critique et commentée du manifeste La ville dans la ville, Berlin, un archipel vert, sur un fond commun qui est le travail de Oswald Matthias Ungers et Raymond Koolhaas. Entre autres aussi, il travaille avec Arno Brandlhuber sur un livre que vous voyez ou vous avez vu dans les diapositives sur une exposition intitulée donc The Dialogic City, Berlin wird Berlin. Arno Brandlhuber, donc entre Jean-Philippe et Aurélie, a fait ses études à Darmstadt et à l'Università dei Studi di Firenze en Italie. En tant qu'architecte, il a commencé son travail à Cologne, chez B&K+, un plus qui va devenir de plus en plus significatif dans tous ses travaux qu'il va faire. Et il ouvrira en 2006 le bureau Brandlhuber Plus Plus, ça veut dire qu'il fait ça en collaboration finalement avec énormément de gens différents. Il détient la chaire d'architecture et d'urbanisme de l'Académie des Bildenden Künste, donc des arts plastiques à Nuremberg. Il enseigne entre autres aussi à la TU Wien. Il est enseignant à la Harvard School of the Graduate School of Design. Et ce qui est remarquable dans sa biographie, c'est que finalement il est perçu très régulièrement hors du champ d'architecture, en politique, en art et énormément d'autres champs qui touchent peut-être la discipline. Et donc il a par exemple une exposition Archipel, Neue Berliner Kunstverein, qui a été aussi publiée, Von der Stadt der Teile zur Stadt der Teilhabe. Peut-être on aura l'occasion de développer ça tout à l'heure. Et donc finalement aussi participer au livre qu'on vient de voir à l'instant. Last but not least, donc Jean-Philippe Vassal, évidemment on n'oublie pas Anne Lacaton, avec qui il a son agence depuis longtemps, donc maintenant aussi à Paris. Diplômé de l'école d'architecture de Bordeaux, et on ne présente plus, mais je vais quand même citer quelques dates. Architecte urbaniste en Afrique de l'Ouest, Niger, de 1985. Hors des travaux qu'ils vont présenter plus tard, il y a évidemment des moments d'enseignement dans sa biographie, comme par exemple l'ENSA de Versailles, de Bordeaux, la Peter Bern School of Architecture à Düsseldorf, la TU de Berlin, le PFL de Lausanne, et il vient d'avoir la chaire de l'UDK à Berlin. Parmi la petite sélection de prix, il y a les lauréats évidemment de la jeune architecture, le prix national de l'architecture 2008, il est International Fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects, le RIBA en 2009, il a été finaliste dans plusieurs éditions du Miss Van der Rohe en 2003-2007, et vous savez tous que ça a fini avec l'équerre d'argent pour un travail commun avec Frédéric Duriot pour la tour Bois-le-Prêtre à Paris. Donc notre conversation va débuter, donc, qui va se faire en 3 phases. On va faire un petit tour de table des 3 sur notre sujet de la Foolproof Normativity. Et la deuxième phase va être une phase où tous les étudiants vont poser les questions qu'ils ont élaborées. Et la troisième partie sera donc d'ouvrir le débat évidemment à vous, à la salle, parce que c'est en fait vous qui êtes intéressant pour nous et inversement évidemment pour les gens sur place. Donc sur la Foolproof Normativity, effectivement dans la façon de détourner les normes, là où l'univers normatif est mis à l'épreuve par un travail critique d'architecte, là où il se révèle manifestement foolproof ou pas foolproof. C'est-à-dire, c'est ce moment-là qu'on voudrait bien explorer avec vous. Et je vais peut-être commencer avec Jean-Philippe, avec une question à 6 mots. Donc, dans quel univers normatif travaillez-vous ?
Bon, merci d'abord de tous d'être là. Merci Arnaud, Florian, Christian. C'est un plaisir de se voir ailleurs qu'à Berlin, mais à Paris. Et puis voilà, c'est toujours agréable de discuter avec les étudiants. Donc j'attends avec impatience les questions. Ça parle aussi de normes, mais ça parle aussi de secrets de fabrique. Je crois que ce qui est important, je pense, c'est il n'y a pas beaucoup de secrets. En fait, les choses sont assez simples. Et je crois qu'il faut... On va juste revenir au début. Voilà. Je crois que ce qui est important, c'est au-delà de la norme, il y a une question de bon sens. Et de se poser tout le temps ces questions de bon sens. Et donc, d'une certaine façon, c'est revenir à des choses simples, comme planter des branches dans le sable et faire une construction. Se reposer par rapport à la modernité des éléments essentiels, la maison domino, le Corbusier. C'est probablement le projet de Le Corbusier que je trouve le plus intéressant, avec les immeubles villas, le plan d'Alger, les quai study house, donc ce programme d'habitation sociale dans les années 50 aux États-Unis. C'est à 8 à 10 poteaux, un toit en acier, une enveloppe, une piscine et un espace à habiter. Lecture Drive, parce que je pense que c'est le summum de l'optimisation d'un espace au niveau de l'immeuble collectif. Donc ça, c'est des références systématiquement qu'on a en tête, qu'on utilise, parce que précisément, elles sont liées à l'économie, au bon sens, à cette idée de construire le plus avec le moins. Faire le maximum avec le minimum. Donc s'il y avait une règle particulière qu'on a envie de suivre, c'est celle-là, c'est la règle du maximum. Construire le maximum avec le minimum. Donc je pense d'ailleurs que ça a été toujours il y a une constance dans l'architecture d'étirer les structures, de passer du roman au gothique, d'aller du plus grand volume avec le minimum de matière, jusqu'à peut-être au less is more, qui aujourd'hui doit être repris par rapport à moins d'énergie, moins d'argent, moins de matière, pour plus de liberté, plus de plaisir, plus de confort, plus d'espace. Donc c'est cette histoire de production de l'espace. Et par rapport à ça, les normes et les règles, on fait avec. Donc c'est assez simple en réalité. Par exemple, quand on a un terrain planté d'arbres, on se fixe certaines règles, ne pas les couper, ne pas aplanir la dune de sable sur laquelle est posée la maison, et ensuite se dire qu'on a une règle qui impose de se mettre à 20 mètres par rapport à la limite littorale, de se mettre à 4 mètres par rapport aux voisins de droite, 4 mètres par rapport aux voisins de gauche, de respecter une hauteur de 7 mètres par rapport au niveau du sol de la dune, et donc de suivre ainsi le faîtage. Et on se dit qu'on ne coupera pas un seul arbre et qu'on ne touchera pas à la dune de sable, et finalement le projet est fait. Tout est fait grâce aux règles, grâce aux normes, grâce aux règlements. Et donc après, il n'y a plus qu'à fabriquer, c'est-à-dire effectivement se mettre dans cette situation de dire que chaque racine, chaque branche est importante, qu'à partir du moment où on a dit qu'on ne coupait pas d'arbre, il ne fallait surtout pas en couper un ou la moitié d'un ou un quart d'un ou un centième d'un, mais faire très attention à tous les buissons, à tout le sol, et construire avec ça pour effectivement créer une situation. Donc c'est effectivement suivre les règles, suivre les règlements, mais avec cette idée de les pousser systématiquement au maximum, avec un objectif qui est celui du plaisir et de la liberté. Faire presque avec rien, c'est là encore sur la question de l'air. Finalement, qu'est-ce qu'on met en place dans les volumes qu'on construit? c'est de l'air qui circule, qui passe par une fenêtre, qui passe par l'autre fenêtre, qui traverse un logement. Et en ce sens, les serres horticoles professionnelles sont remarquables puisque, que ce soit en Suède ou en Arabie Saoudite, on est capable de faire pousser des roses très très précisément avec une précision qui n'a rien à voir avec celle qui est demandée pour fabriquer des maisons et construire un climat avec le climat extérieur. C'est-à-dire, c'est jamais une bataille, une lutte contre le climat, c'est toujours un jeu avec le climat. C'est travailler avec le climat et pas contre le climat. Il y a quelque chose d'aberrant aujourd'hui dans les réglementations qui est de dire on va fabriquer, on va définir une habitation, un appartement par rapport aux 5 jours les pires de l'hiver et par rapport aux 5 jours les pires de l'été. Et c'est ces 5 jours qui vont définir l'enveloppe et la peau du bâtiment. Comme si, quand on porte il fait très froid et qu'on porte un manteau l'hiver, on vous obligeait à le garder toute l'année. En réalité, il faut effectivement réfléchir à des systèmes dynamiques, à des systèmes qui sont valables l'hiver, qui sont valables l'été, qui sont valables la nuit, qui sont valables au printemps, qui sont valables en fonction des jours et des qualités de chaque journée, et même de la bonne ou mauvaise humeur de son habitant. Donc, utiliser de façon très standard, effectivement, ces outils hautement technologiques et d'une grande économie pour simplement fabriquer des habitations à partir de là. Une partie isolée à l'intérieur d'une serre horticole crée les conditions d'un très grand volume, donc qui va profiter de cette régulation climatique amenée par la CRC, jouer avec le climat plutôt que de se battre contre le climat. C'est effectivement réfléchir à tous ces systèmes d'ombre, de laisser passer le soleil l'été, de se protéger du soleil l'hiver, de jouer avec un système particulier la nuit ou la journée ou en demi-saison, avec un acteur essentiel au milieu de ce système qui le fait fonctionner, qui est l'habitant. Faire confiance à l'habitant. Simplement, c'est son confort, c'est son plaisir qui va définir le système de fonctionnement. Et donc ensuite, il s'agit éventuellement de le dupliquer, de le multiplier pour le faire passer d'un système individuel à un système collectif, comme du logement social, et de voir comment ce système efficace permet, dans un budget donné, qui est le même que celui d'un budget standard, de faire des logements qui peuvent être 2 ou 3 fois plus grands que les logements habituels, et qui fonctionne avec le climat extérieur. Faire du climat extérieur son ami et pas son ennemi. Cette idée du maximum, elle est pour tous les projets. C'est-à-dire que dans chaque configuration, on va au maximum des limites parcellaires et au maximum de la hauteur possible. C'est-à-dire, d'une certaine façon, ça évite de se poser le problème de la forme, puisque la forme est définie par la règle et par cette idée du maximum. Donc, comme à Nantes, où finalement, là encore, on met en place une structure extrêmement capable avec des planchers qui ont des taux de résistance de 1 tonne par mètre carré et qui vont créer une situation de facilité. C'est-à-dire une situation dans laquelle toutes les choses seront plus faciles, que ce soit l'accessibilité des handicapés, que ce soit les questions climatiques, que ce soit le cloisonnement des espaces et les besoins des enseignants. Le trop d'espace donne un maximum de facilité. Donc une superstructure avec une rue qui passe d'un premier niveau à un deuxième niveau et qui va jusque sur le toit, une trame extrêmement simple, donc extrêmement économique, qui permet, par rapport à un projet dans lequel on demande de produire 10 à 12 000 m² de surface, on peut finalement produire 30 000 m² de surface pour une école d'architecture. Une école d'architecture qui s'inscrit dans une structure capable et qui est précisément, tout d'un coup, susceptible d'inviter d'autres écoles, de créer des événements, de faire des expositions d'art parce qu'il y a plus de surface. Et dans lesquels on travaille de la même façon que pour la maison précédente avec ce système de climat intermédiaire. Donc c'est créer des situations de facilité qui évitent d'avoir à rentrer dans la sophistication qui est celle aujourd'hui des règlements, des normes trop précises. Donc, donner de l'espace, créer du sol, pour effectivement créer de l'usage, de la liberté, du plaisir, des ambiances différentes et différentes possibilités d'occupation qui vont largement au-delà du programme. C'est-à-dire que c'est absolument plus une sorte de bâtiment fonctionnaliste, c'est un bâtiment qui crée des possibilités, des capacités, de la liberté pour être à l'aise et pour que tout devienne facile. Il faut juste trouver l'économie qui permet ça. Et donc, effectivement, les systèmes les plus simples possibles et les plus efficaces pour produire ce système-là. Cet espace, il est utilisé au maximum. Parfois, il a besoin d'être occupé, comme dans ce projet pour l'Architectural Foundation, où finalement, dans ce volume maximal, une structure géante va occuper l'espace et qui va provoquer une réaction avec le reste des espaces. Ici à l'Architectural Foundation, ou ici pour un projet de musée à Guangzhou en Chine, où là encore, le symbole de la ville, qui sont 5 béliers, vient traverser un bâtiment qui lui aussi est poussé au maximum de sa volumétrie possible. Donc, effectivement, se donner cette capacité du maximum qui favorise ensuite toutes les libertés, toutes les possibilités. Faire ou ne rien faire, c'est-à-dire que par rapport à l'embellissement d'une place, se dire le projet peut consister à répondre « il ne faut rien faire » et finalement convaincre le client que c'est la meilleure des choses et le faire ainsi. Ou faire très peu, comme au Palais de Tokyo, simplement réfléchir à chaque poteau, à le stabiliser ou le protéger au feu, ou intervenir à minima et finalement donner la possibilité d'utiliser l'espace par les usagers. Au Palais de Tokyo, par exemple, la question du renouvellement d'air hygiénique, il y avait des équipements de serre horticole au niveau des verrières. Et finalement, plutôt que de faire des entrées d'air dans les façades en marbre, on a considéré que chaque spectateur, en rentrant par les portes, ferait rentrer suffisamment d'air pour assurer ce renouvellement hygiénique. Calcul à l'appui, c'était tout à fait possible. De la même façon, le gros problème de le Palais de Tokyo consistait en la stabilité au feu de la structure. Et là encore, plutôt que de suivre nos ingénieurs qui nous disaient que cette stabilité au feu est nulle, on a essayé de démontrer que finalement, il y avait d'autres façons, d'autres méthodes de calcul qui permettaient de la maintenir en l'état sans la recouvrir d'un flocage affreux et de pouvoir assurer la résistance nécessaire. Ne construire avec ce qui existe plutôt que démolir, c'est-à-dire faire avec, juste faire évoluer, transformer, passer du dedans vers le dehors, donner de la facilité, de la liberté, en rajoutant plutôt qu'en démolissant et en reconstruisant souvent moins bien que ce qu'on a démoli auparavant. Et donc, le faire à toutes les échelles. On a parlé de la tour Bois-le-Prêtre, mais ici, ce projet à Bordeaux, où il y a à peu près 600 logements, la barre du Grand Parc, sur lequel on a fait cette extension de peu près de 50% de surface supplémentaire, des réfections de salles de bain, des réfections des ascenseurs, des réfections d'électricité, et cet espace supplémentaire qui change à partir de l'existant, qui rend l'existant différent, plus facile, plus libre et plus confortable à l'intérieur. Donc un appartement dont on enlève la façade et dont on crée une extension qui permet plus d'usage, plus de liberté, plus de possibilités. C'est l'image du poster, je crois. Et puis, voilà, toujours produire de l'espace, c'est-à-dire effectivement, quand il y a ce type d'espace et que le programme demande de remplir l'intérieur de ce bâtiment pour un centre d'art, se dire que finalement ce qui est à protéger et ce qui est à garder, c'est ce vide, et que finalement la meilleure solution, c'est de construire le double, le frère siamois du premier bâtiment, pour finalement créer encore là plus de capacités, plus de possibilités. Et c'est ce maximum de surface, c'est ce maximum de capacités supplémentaires qui rend toutes les choses très très facile. La seule règle à gérer, c'est effectivement une question d'économie, de rester dans un budget, de démontrer que construire à côté coûte beaucoup moins cher que de construire dedans, et que construire à côté permet de garder ce qui était dedans, et effectivement de donner plus de liberté pour l'usage, pour l'utilisation future du bâtiment. Donc c'est précisément cette situation d'alléger le système, de fonctionner avec des idées de bon sens, fonctionner avec des systèmes qui ne coûtent rien, l'air, le vent, le soleil, le climat, les intégrer, travailler avec l'existant et faire de l'économie, de la maîtrise de cette économie, une alliée et non pas une contrainte supplémentaire, mais au contraire de la prendre comme un vecteur de liberté supplémentaire pour l'architecte et pour les espaces qu'il construit et indirectement ensuite pour les usagers du bâtiment.
C'est bon? Oui. Alors peut-être avant de vous parler de quelques projets, une réflexion un peu plus générale sur la question des normes, sur ce que ça représente les normes. Alors les normes sont un instrument de la modernité pour égaliser en gros la société et ses individus et pour rationaliser la ville et son architecture. Donc face à une société assez très inégale, je parle là du 19e, début 20e siècle, donc face à une société très inégale et des villes très insalubres, ce processus de normalisation elle est assez plausible parce que les normes assurent des standards minimums. Par exemple, l'intégration des les personnes à mobilité réduite, par exemple, de leur donner la possibilité d'accéder aux bâtiments publics, de plus en plus aux transports en commun. Mais je vous invite à lire, entre autres, Adorno, par exemple, Théodore Adorno, ou quelqu'un comme Michel Foucault, qui justement soulève le danger d'une hyper-rationalisation de la société. Donc aujourd'hui, nous vivons dans ce que le sociologue Ulrich Beck appelle la société de risque, c'est-à-dire plus précisément une société qui cherche à exclure tout risque. Et donc les normes, bien évidemment, participent, contribuent, sont l'instrument pour ce faire. Alors nous pouvons observer aujourd'hui, et je pense que ça on le partage, ce constat, une inflation de normes qui rendent notre profession de plus en plus complexe, et la construction de plus en plus coûteuse. Et alors cette inflation de normes, elle contrecarre souvent les objectifs que les normes se sont donnés finalement, qui est l'égalisation. C'est-à-dire que si l'architecture elle est de plus en plus chère, eh ben, elle est accessible à une plus grande minorité. Donc je m'attaque aujourd'hui principalement aux normes, à la question des normes dans les contextes urbains. Enfin, qui touche bien évidemment la question de l'architecture. Donc ce que vous voyez ici, c'est finalement une figure idéale de la normalisation de la ville, d'une rationalisation de la ville. Là, vous voyez, ça date de 1957. Finalement, vous connaissez tous cette idée de la ville qui présente bien évidemment dont les fonctions sont séparées les unes des autres, dans des zones différentes, donc dans des zones selon bien évidemment la charte d'Athènes, dans les zones de travail, dans les zones d'habitation, dans les zones de loisirs, et le tout est séparé de la circulation. Donc vous voyez ici l'idéal, cette figure se présente comme une sorte de corps idéal avec des artères, avec des organes qui sont bien distincts les uns des autres. Alors là c'est un petit projet courant de l'agence. Et vous voyez que cet idéal des années 50, qui renvoie bien évidemment à une idéologie des années qui a été poussée dans les années 20-30, eh ben, il est toujours présent dans pas mal de PLU, dans pas mal de situations, on va dire, urbaines. Donc ici, c'est un projet en cours qui se joue dans une ville allemande, à Heidelberg. Et vous voyez que, bien évidemment, rien qu'en voyant ce plan fond figure, vous pouvez vous imaginer qu'il n'y a que de l'habitation, donc en bas et à gauche de ce pointillé, de cette ligne en pointillé. Et au-delà de ça, il n'y a que des bureaux. Donc finalement, au début, ça avait un certain sens, éventuellement. Et donc il y avait ce terrain auquel on était confronté et qui était un peu entre ces deux zones. Et donc nous, on s'est dit, donc on devait faire logiquement que des bureaux. Mais la demande de la société a complètement changé. La demande de la ville a complètement changé. La ville, elle a besoin de logements. Et donc, qu'est-ce qu'on a fait tout simplement? Bon, ça c'est assez simple, c'est de dire, OK, on fait les deux, on fait des bureaux et puis on superpose des habitations. C'était vraiment on a beaucoup travaillé avec les clients sur cette demande, mais de changer le plan d'occupation, vous allez voir, c'est assez infernal. Donc finalement, c'est un PLU qui date de 1972 et donc qui est toujours valide en 2015. Donc finalement, donc je vous ai dit égalisation, donc vous pouvez voir dans nos parties, dans nos zones suburbaines, regardez bien les PLU et regardez cette image qui est assez emblématique pour cette situation-là, où bien évidemment les PLU définissent tout. C'est-à-dire que l'emplacement, l'emprise de ces maisons, la pente de la toiture, la distance entre les maisons, la distance par rapport à la voie, etc., etc. Donc finalement, on avait ce petit projet assez modeste. C'était à Saint-Germain-en-Laye où le mètre carré du foncier est excessivement cher. Et puis ce terrain, là je me suis permis, sur ce plan-là, de vous visualiser la taille du terrain. Et finalement, donc, il était assez immense et tout était inconstructible. C'est-à-dire sur ce terrain de 2500 mètres carrés, il y avait une toute petite maison de 80 mètres carrés et quelqu'un donc notre client qui voulait acheter donc, ce terrain-là, qui était excessivement cher, il avait 4 enfants, donc il avait besoin d'espace. Mais le terrain était inconstructible. Donc comment faire? Et donc ça, c'était assez joli comme contradiction, puisqu'on adore, comme architecte, on adore les contradictions. Et donc on a convaincu, bien évidemment, les architectes voyez, d'inscrire tout ce programme dans le paysage et de dire juste, c'était une phrase qui faisait passer le projet en disant que depuis Google Earth, vous ne voyez rien. Le projet, il n'est pas présent. Et donc, on a construit une extension de à peu près 200 mètres carrés. Donc, vous voyez ici dans la coupe comment ça s'inscrit dans ce paysage et puis à l'intérieur, l'espace qui contourne un énorme tilleul qu'on voulait bien évidemment garder. Alors, une autre petite maison, c'est aussi qui pose la question de combien construire sur quelle empreinte. Jean-Philippe, il a montré, voilà, remplir, dans certains cas où ça a un sens, remplir l'emprise au sol, enfin la surface constructible. Donc, vous voyez ici, l'emprise était plus ou moins définie. Et nous, on présente ici, on s'est dit, parce qu'on arrive sur le terrain, puis on est venu avec une échelle. On a fait monter le client, il y avait une vue absolument magnifique sur la vallée du Rhin, c'est en Allemagne à nouveau. Et donc on s'est dit, l'emprise au sol, il faut la réduire, par contre il faut aller en hauteur. Ce qui était permis dans le PLU, c'était un seul étage. Mais bon, il y a des règles quand vous connaissez bien les règles, vous arrivez à contourner cette réglementation d'un étage. Et puis finalement, ça vient de s'achever, cette maison, on a réussi à construire 4 étages avec une emprise qui est excessivement réduite et qui permet bien sûr d'avoir cette vue absolument magnifique du haut. Alors, vous voyez ici comment chaque point de la façade redessine finalement ce qui est possible. Et alors, il ne faut pas se tromper hein, quand vous passez à la réalisation. C'est vraiment au centimètre près. D'ailleurs, c'est assez intéressant parce qu'il y a les voisins qui sont allés à la mairie, qui ont tous râlé à la mairie et qui ont dit comment c'est possible, mais sauf qu'ils sont allés trop tôt. Il n'y avait que 2 étages qui étaient réalisés. Et donc, il y a à ce moment-là le géomètre qui doit sortir, qui doit faire un relevé. C'est à la charge d'ailleurs de notre client. Et donc il a dit c'est bon, ils sont bien là. Et puis on a rajouté deux autres niveaux finalement après. Alors ici, c'est un peu la même situation, finalement, ça redessine ce qui est possible. Et puis là, vous ne voyez pas, mais finalement, le rez-de-chaussée, qui est une maison de verre, elle remplit l'emprise au sol possible, mais sauf qu'elle est posée, j'aurais dû montrer ici une coupe aussi, parce qu'elle est posée sur un socle qui, lui, est réduit, qui fait que la moitié de ce rez-de-chaussée. Et finalement, c'était aussi là, encore une fois, la galère. Tous les voisins qui sont allés à la mairie pour aller, qui ont dit comment c'est possible, il y a juste une toiture en pente possible, orientation est-ouest, pourquoi c'est possible de faire une toiture plate. Donc, il faut bien puiser la réglementation et bien connaître la législation pour savoir qu'est-ce qui est possible, comment vous pouvez contourner les règles. Alors finalement, ça m'a beaucoup amusé cette réaction par rapport à toiture en pente ou toiture plate. J'ai trouvé ça assez drôle. C'est pour ça que je vous montre cette image des années... Finalement, c'est une image assez récente, mais qui montre une situation des années 20, parce qu'il y avait une querelle entre les avocats, on va dire traditionnalistes, les avocats de la toiture en pente, et les avocats d'une toiture terrasse, plate, que vous voyez ici. C'est cette jolie situation à Berlin où les deux parties, finalement, se confrontent dans la même rue. Alors, bien évidemment, ce sujet-là m'intéresse ou nous intéresse, puisque vous voyez sur cette affiche les nos trois noms sur cette affiche. Et donc, ça nous intéresse aussi à l'échelle de la théorie, ou si vous voulez, de la réflexion sur la ville. Donc, j'aimais beaucoup, alors c'est une conférence, enfin, c'est un petit colloque que Arno Brandlhuber a organisé à Berlin, et j'aimais bien cette image qu'il a choisie je crois que c'est Hugh Ferris, non? C'est Hugh Ferris qui montre dans ces images un peu utopiques, qui dessine finalement, l'architecture se dessine à travers la réglementation. Et qu'est-ce qui est très joli, peut-être vous connaissez cette réglementation à New York, ou plus précisément à Manhattan, c'est que vous avez aussi un gabarit, vous avez un certain gabarit qu'on normalement on ne peut pas dépasser en hauteur, mais finalement quand vous avez un client, par exemple celui de gauche, qui n'a, pour X raisons, qui ne remplit pas, qui ne va pas jusqu'au bout de ce gabarit, eh bien, il peut vendre le vide à son voisin, qui lui peut rajouter la même partie au-delà du gabarit. Donc c'est vraiment un joli, enfin un système, on va dire, capitaliste, mais qui génère une certaine hétérogénéité de l'image urbaine. Donc finalement, Christian l'avait présenté tout à l'heure, donc ça c'est le livre dans lequel on est aussi à nouveau tous les trois. Malheureusement, le livre aujourd'hui il est entièrement en allemand avec une seule contribution en anglais, celle de Jean-Philippe. Et donc on a, juste pour venir à ça, parce que finalement, je vous ai montré, j'ai essayé de vous montrer que finalement c'est toujours le projet moderne qui est très dominant dans les réglementations ou dans les normes de la ville. Or, ici, à Berlin, nous avions affaire, et nous avons toujours affaire, à une réglementation qui s'inspire finalement de cet idéal-là, qui est l'idéal de la ville au XIXe siècle, pour laquelle Hans Koloff, qui par ailleurs qu'on apprécie beaucoup parce que c'est un très bon architecte, mais qui a présenté cette image au concours pour la Potsdamer Platz en 92. Et vous voyez ici, c'est un peu cet idéal de l'image urbaine du XIXe siècle, où il fallait absolument respecter le gabarit de 22 mètres de hauteur, qui est le gabarit historique. Et à partir de là, vous pouvez en retrait rajouter plusieurs niveaux. Donc finalement, à Berlin, ce qui était intéressant, c'est cette opposition alors, entre la ville, si vous voulez, entre la ville moderne et la ville postmoderne, qui était complètement bâtarde comme opposition. Et vous voyez ici, bien évidemment, les responsables, ils ont voté pour ce que vous voyez à droite, parce que ça, c'est un livre que l'ancien directeur d'urbanisme, Hans Stimmann, a présenté au milieu des années 90. Et bien évidemment, qui lui défendait l'urbanisme que vous voyez sur la droite, qui est un urbanisme, on va dire, historiciste, c'est-à-dire que c'est vraiment la reconstruction de la ville du XIXe siècle. Et vous voyez que ce qui était l'ennemi, c'était ce que vous voyez sur la gauche. Bon, c'est pas un hasard qu'il a montré ça sur la gauche et son projet sur la droite. Ce qui présente donc sur la gauche, c'est l'ennemi, c'est vraiment la ville moderniste, apparemment, qui ne génère aucune urbanité, où vous avez des bars qui sont posés comme ça sur la pelouse. Et en fait, finalement, notre ambition, c'était de dire, est-ce qu'on ne peut pas établir un dialogue entre ces deux approches-là, au lieu de toujours les faire s'opposer. Donc, de ne pas les penser en opposition, mais de les penser ensemble. Alors là, et c'est ça qui nous intéresse probablement le plus dans cette idée de la reconstruction, c'est pour ça qu'on essaie de trouver des alternatives. Finalement, là, vous voyez le projet ultime de la reconstruction, ce qui est une vision assez réelle pour Berlin. Vous voyez sur la gauche, l'image de gauche, c'est l'état de Berlin, c'est vraiment le centre historique de Berlin, après les bombardements de 44-45. Vous voyez que c'est vraiment une plaine où il y a quelques monuments qui restent. Et à droite, c'est le projet assez récent de toute cette bande-là. Vous voyez qu'il veut reconstruire les îlots d'avant-guerre. Finalement, l'idéal, c'est de revenir à la ville pré-industrielle ou pré-moderne, si vous voulez. Et finalement, ce qui est au cœur là-dedans, c'est ça qu'il faut comprendre, c'est que c'est bien évidemment la privatisation du sol. Et ça, c'est vraiment aussi, c'est le dernier chapitre de notre livre et de notre exposition. C'est, il faut juste que vous compreniez que juste après la chute du mur, 50% du sol de Berlin appartenait à la ville ou à l'État. C'est-à-dire que 50% du sol était de propriété publique. Ils ont vendu, on ne sait pas combien reste, mais ils ont pratiquement tout vendu, surtout après le scandale des banques. Donc ils ont pratiquement tout vendu. Et donc l'idée, c'est de revenir à ça, c'est de pousser encore plus la privatisation du sol au centre-ville. Or, nous disons que, bien évidemment, c'est juste beau, cette situation absolument magnifique, qui n'est pas finie, parce qu'ici, on veut toujours finir les choses. C'est peut-être de rester cette situation absolument magnifique. Et donc, on a établi aussi, on s'est dit, parce que le livre n'est pas seulement une critique d'architecture ou d'urbanisme, mais il propose aussi d'autres méthodes, d'autres manières d'aborder l'urbanisme et l'architecture. Donc, très très simple, on s'est dit, voilà, est-ce qu'on oublie pour l'instant un peu ce gabarit de 22 mètres historique qui est toujours présent et qui détermine toujours l'urbanisme d'aujourd'hui. Et on ne peut pas se dire que, donc ça c'est la première alternative, Arnaud va vous présenter la deuxième, et après on va passer en anglais. Donc de dire, est-ce qu'on ne peut pas pour les nouvelles constructions, se dire, on peut rajouter un étage éventuellement en haut. Vous savez que pour un promoteur, ce qui est toujours le plus intéressant, parce que le dernier étage se vend le mieux, et parfois 4, 5, 6 fois plus que le premier étage. Et donc, de libérer ainsi le sol, donc finalement revenir peut-être à une libération du sol, ou en tout cas de le rendre accessible. Donc ça, c'est la première alternative. And now we switch to English, and the second alternative. Merci beaucoup.
English is fine for you, I hope. I'm so sorry I'm not speaking French. If anybody has a question, because he can't understand at all, then the one who did the introduction, he will translate it, no? That's perfect. So the second, let's say, we thought, why do we always play chess with the rules, with the legislation, with the existing, with the norms? Why can't we as architects not think that we could write the laws? That's also an active act of architecture. So one we would like to implement on the state level of Berlin, because it's not only a city but also a city-state, that if you rent out one floor for a social housing price, then you are allowed to build one more floor on top.
above the existing regulations. What would that lead to? We made questions around, and 80% of the house owners would do that, because you gain a penthouse, expensive one, and it means that you have to rent out, as long as the building is existing, one floor, the same service to a social housing price. Then you have like heterogeneity, you have like social, cultural, complete mixture in the same building. And for sure, especially in the center where the prices are the highest and where the less social housing is still existing and it's not built in Berlin, you would have this mixture, and it's not made by the state because it would be handed over to the private hand. Another question is, you might know, we have the first 1 million of refugees that came to Berlin, and we will have another 4 million. And now we have the questions, why can't we build also in industrial areas? I will come back to that later. And I think this kind of separation, you explained it also before, that we think one part is for housing, one is industries. On the other hand, we really deal with like green energy, and we deal with a production that's not longer polluting the environment. So why can't we combine living and working? This is an example in Lichtenberg where also Jean-Philippe made some research on. All you see black, that's Berlin, and all you see black is protected. So you have either like listed buildings, listed environments, water protection, nature protection. And the strange thing is we always think that protection is something going back. So like enabling something. If we would think that all this 50% would be like an intelligent base of discussing about the environment, the built environment, then we would already have like a law base for 50% of Berlin. Like to think it in a kind of less restrictive way, but in a more active way. So we are ongoing with this legislating architecture theme. This is something we just started to research at ETH in Switzerland, and you might know, completely different than in France. You have a really top-down system of ruling and of normativity. They have this kind of referendum system. So if there is a new building law coming into being, they will have for sure a referendum, and they can vote against or for it. So, and then they would campaign with like posters for a yes and no. One example you might know, there was one referendum whether a mosque is allowed to have a minaret or not, and the Swiss guys voted against for new built mosques that they are not allowed to have a minaret. And now we can ask ourselves, does that influence architecture? Yes. Imagine you have to make a new mosque. As a young architect, you are not allowed to build a minaret. So that's really interfering in the sphere of architecture. And I show you a film. It's 2 minutes. It will be our next contribution to the architectural biennial. Warum machen Sie von der Legislativen auf der Ebene, wo es sozusagen auch kleinteiliger wird, keinen Gebrauch? Also wenn ich jetzt die Möglichkeit hätte, Gesetze zu machen.
Ich will mich überhaupt nicht beschweren, weil ich bin voller Tatendrang, diese Stadt zu gestalten. Aber ich sage Ihnen einfach, dass Personalkapazitäten im Moment begrenzt sind.
Natürlich ist so wie der Gesetzestext das Buch der Bücher, oder? Und auch wenn du nicht lesen kannst oder willst, oder? Und keine Zeit dazu hast als Architekt, den Text musst du einfach lesen und verstehen. gut abgesprochen, dass wir die Texte einfach neu schreiben.
It's a really sexy film on a very boring topic. So legislating architecture seems to be something really non-interesting. And now we will contribute that, like legislating architecture in Germany, in Switzerland, and in Italy, because there's also a different system, as a contribution to this Aravena Biennale reports from the front. Are you there as well? So we are not allowed to talk about that we are invited, but I think for boring topics we are allowed maybe even earlier. So, but how did it happen that a young architect, I'm no longer a young architect, I'm going back now to our first project. How does it happen that architects are interested in lawmaking? This was my first commission, and no other architect wanted to build there. It's like only 2.56 meters wide, it's like 40 meters deep, and then we thought if we build walls, then nothing is remaining. So, but if we don't build walls, we have a problem, because we have a law that every building should stand on its own, even if the neighboring buildings are removed. So therefore we had to invent something that we buy the right of the neighbors to use their walls, just to use it as a shelf system without building walls. But then how to prove it if a neighbor is demolishing his building? And then it was a really huge construction legal-wise, only to get the permission. And then we thought, okay, that's nice. So if we learn to play with the legal constraints like a chess play, like if we know better the rules than maybe the administrations, then maybe we could win the battle. I go through very quickly. So this is the building. It's like, I showed this one maybe, going back for a moment. So on this side it was allowed to build 4 floors by legal restrictions. 4 full floors means 4 floors, 100% covered. And then we found a rule that you are allowed to build a roof, a pitched roof, which doesn't count, that doesn't count if it's only like a certain percentage of the floor below. And then we found out it was never written that you're only allowed to make 1 roof floor. So we added 7 roof floors and came to this form. So now it has 11 floors. And it's all within the building code, because we just made like 7 roofs that's going smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's a really nice building, you know, like a Matterhorn, like a mountain, like. What happened then? The investor was really happy with his young architects because he has so much more service. Then he sold the whole project, the ground, to another developer, and he took other architects. So one point on if you play this game on ruling. We have a rule that if you have a firewall, you see the firewall on the right-hand side is higher than the one on the left-hand side. You are allowed to build there, attached to the firewall. So this is a very small project. As you can see, we were asked to make an extension on top, and we thought it's stupid to make something nice on top. No, so just follow the rules. You have 2 firewalls, you can connect the 2 firewalls, then you just do the same and the project is ready. Then we didn't get a building permission because it was the chief of the city planning said it's too ugly. And we have 1 paragraph, if something is Verunstaltung, how to translate then? Verunstaltung is even more than ugly.
Défiguration.
Of the surrounding.
Défiguration.
So we didn't get building permission even if everything else was okay. And then we found out you have to communicate for that. And as this project was in the German pavilion in the Biennale, we phoned the guy, and let's say half a day before the press conference, and asked the guy, should we make it public that Germany is showing that in the pavilion in Venice, and you are refusing a building permission because of its ugliness? And then he said, okay, then you can have the permission. So in this part of communication becomes much more important, I think. And then you can play the same game. There's a project in Copenhagen. It was a competition. It was like 4 firewalls again. Now we know what will happen. We will use the firewalls. And it should be a sports culture center. So You need to play soccer, ball height, ball, the field length, that's what you need for what was just required. And then you should give light to the neighbors, and that's it. And then you make a really cheap envelope. And I have to say, when we finished the first building, this 2.56 meters wide, we made with our very small office, it were only 2 people, we made a tour to Jean-Philippe's and Anne Lacanton's first building in Bordeaux. This very small house, 300,000 French francs in that time, which is, in that time it would be like 50,000 euro, no? Okay. And what we learned of that is if you keep things very cheap, it's a real advantage. And it's an advantage, so it's not only on the space, the freedom you gain by more space, it's also if you normally you would pay back, if you buy an apartment here in Paris or a flat, you will pay back till you are 65. If you get something for half price, you can pay it back till 50 maybe. And that's also a liberation, no? That you don't have to pay back so long. And you can look at all the real estate crises that make you learn that it's somehow stupid to pay back your whole life. So here we were asked, as it's a sports center, that the temperature should be like 21 degrees. But if anybody of you plays soccer, even in autumn or in winter, you are happy if it's not raining, if it's not snowing. So to play soccer, it's completely okay, even if you just have like 16 degrees. That's what we can make, because our envelope was double sized than the project was intended to be. So we just use polycarbonates, very cheap, and you can play soccer at 16 degrees in winter time, which is perfect. And underneath this kind of tribunes, you have all the parts like dance and whatever that needs like a higher temperature. And as it's so big, people didn't know what to do with the rest of the space, and now they really use it for a lot of other things that were not in the program before. So that's somehow the same argument, that if you make it bigger for same price, you don't know what to do with it, and this not knowing is the interesting part. Showing one project, what do I show? Okay. I think you have the same now as we have to avoid CO2 consumption. We have to put all this insulation on houses, and it's becoming more and more like igloos somehow. And then we said, okay, we have this is a given thing, it's a given building, it's a very ugly one, and we should keep it because it's a lot of gray energy already in it, because some people made it, the material has energy in it, so we should keep it, and then maybe not use insulation. And maybe just use, it has a surface of 500 square meter, so you can calculate, you're allowed 30 kilowatt square meter per year. So okay, we put only this energy in, but we don't use insulation on the outside. And that leads to a concept, you see it here. We only heat it with a sauna and an oven. And then we have curtains. And if it's getting really cold, and last year we had no day when we had to use the curtains, putting this energy in. I'm sure when it's like -10, -15 for some days, you will have to use the curtains. Yeah, that's maybe we skip that. It's like if you want to look out of a house, you should just make windows bigger, no? If they're too small. So we invited all our friends, make the windows we would like to look at, and that's after the day. Next day we had really pain everywhere, because normally we only work at our working desk and not like with heavy tools. But now it's looking like that, and it's a very cheap building. It costs the same than a 100 square meter building in a normal standard. It's the same than a 100 square meter building in a normal standard, built new, and now we have 500 square meters. And you can already see on the left-hand side you have the curtain, you would close it, you see on the right-hand side this little line on the roof, there the curtain is put around, and you can be sure, like if you go as a couple or whatever, so it's so cozy to close it a little, to have the fire, to have a sauna, and then the whole rest of the year you have like 500 square meter for conferences and whatever. This is the next project we will do, and that's already in this industrial area. I told you it's not allowed in these industrial areas to have housing, it's not allowed to have culture, it's not allowed to have sports. This is Lichtenberg, Berlin, the Vietnamese center, so it's the fastest way to Vietnam from Berlin. It's like 20 minutes from the very center. It's very interesting. You can learn a lot of those people. And we bought those 2 towers. And they are only standing because it was too expensive to remove them. So we didn't pay for the towers, but we got the ground cheaper because the towers are on that. And now we will have, it will become our office, it will become a living community. And the legal act we do like this, we tell them it's like a prototype production for element housing for refugees, because now everybody would give you any permission if it's for refugees. But that in the end meant you also have to test housing, so we will just live there. And who should, let's say, tell us to go out of there? And well, and we really like that, like also to stress the authorities by just not fulfilling their requirements. And the first thing we built, or one of us built, because he wants to have goats there. Goats, animals. Yeah. So the first thing is we made this little mountain there, and now when the community of the Vietnamese community is having a wedding, to make the photos, to see everybody on the photo, they would always stand on this little hill for the photos. Since then, we are protected by the Vietnamese community that nothing is getting stolen there. And so you can change a lot in the wild field of the nothingness, let's say. If you say it's not longer a field of the lawmaking of the cities. And I tell you, so very shortly, a students' project, it's like 10 students worked 10 days, and then we signed them that they made half a year of building site experience and paid them a flight to the Venice Biennale, and I just show you what we did. It's about this building in the front on the right-hand side. It's rather demolished. If we would have removed it because it's not in a buildable area, we would not have been allowed to build there. So the only protection by law we have, it's existing. And if something is existing, you need like 3 walls. 3 walls standing, it's existing. 2.5 walls standing, off. No existing right. And you can see it's hardly 3 walls existing, so how do you start? So it's a very simple exercise. So you first clean, you make, this is the 3 walls, make a new floor, concrete, and then we use something, it's like a formwork only on the inside, and then you fill in concrete, and it's a very advanced technology, because you can see we lift up the formwork. It's Gleitschalung, how you call that? So we make it half a meter, because we were not trained to make this kind of pressure in situ concrete. And we build and build and build and build, and a roof, and then what's coming out is like, as the inside of the building, of the existing building, was used as the formwork, you see now all this nice former imprints. It's a little bit like Rachel Whiteridge, the artist project from the late 80s. So it is a window, you see everything. So you could say on one hand, all the emotional energy that was in the building is still, let's say, it's somehow still in the being, because you have an imprint. And then the authorities came and said, no, this was not allowed. It's like you made all new. And then we told them, but this is the proof. In any time, all walls have been there. So all 3 walls have been standing. Otherwise, they couldn't be imprinted. And we removed them otherwise. So this building itself is the proof that it was existing in all times. And now it's a very nice guest house, I have to say, a very nice guest house. So this is a situation how it looked before, and this is how it looks now. Okay, it's a winter and a summer picture, but... And maybe one very shortly, Shall we stop?
No, no, last project, no?
So when I came to Berlin, I have to say we were bankrupt in Cologne with our office. So I said maybe it's better to leave the city and go to Berlin. There was also a love involved, so it was a very good reason to go to Berlin. And then I found this ground, and in that time it was 2005, 2006, a lot of these situations were existing. Though this is coming from the gold rush in 89, 1991, everybody thought now Berlin's becoming capital, now we can make a fortune. And then they found out it's not so easy, so they left it behind. So this here, there was only the basement was existing, and we bought the ground. We bought the ground ourselves with the Cologne bank that didn't know about the Berlin conditions. For the value of the ground, minus the removal costs of the basement, that became really cheap. And then we went to the bank and told them our own part, because you normally have to have like 30% on your own, and then you get the rest from the bank. With that, we will build the basement. The basement, that's the most expensive because neighboring walls, and they say, okay, if you do the basement, we will finance the rest. So that meant for us, we only had to finance 5% of the whole project. And to do something on your own could lead to two directions. One would be you fuck it, because you think now, or you really go for what you would like to go for. And if you would like to have your friends in, for example, then you have to build really cheap, because the only thing we have as a general agreement, we just share the interest. We don't make any profit, and we just use it for 10 years. Then we will sell it again and do another project. So to build very cheap is not so easy. So that's the condition. We knew there's an elevator shaft, and then it's all about constraints from the outside. Ungers call this Bindung, like constraints at the best. So with that, the only thing we know where the elevator shaft is, we know the ground plan, because we have to build on the existing basement. So we also take the neighboring heights. We had a contract that the light from southwest has to fall into the courtyard, so we had to cut the roof, okay? But we made an exception in the contract that the elevator is allowed to push in. Then we had like two different situations, right and left. So we had like a 5-meter firewall on one side, and we said, okay, that could be an outside stair, because if you have the staircase not in the house, but outside, you have more space in the house. And you don't even have to heat the stair, because you don't have a case. So, and it's becoming something completely different. So if one is using that as a terrace and doing a barbecue, the neighbors are always passing by. And you always have to put more on the barbecue, because they will pass by. And it's all according to the fire regulations, because if it's in a distance of 5 meters, then it's like a very safe one. And then the authorities came and that, well, that's not Berlin-like. You don't get a permission. And they made a point that it's because of the fire regulations. Then we found somebody else who proved us that this is okay, because we had built it before. And then they didn't want to give us a permission, because then it's like anybody else could use this permission, but they did not even want to not give us a permission, because then we would have gone to court and we would have won. So, and there is a certain condition in Berlin: if they don't answer for 3 months, you have a fictional permission. It's not existing, but you can do as if you have the permission. So this house doesn't have the permission, but is a fiction of a permission, which is even much nicer. And then, yeah, then we had to form the ground as well, because the fire brigades have only 8-meter long ladders they can bring in. So we had to form the ground a little bit, and so we really tried to make a project just coming out of outside conditions. So if you want to make it cheap, don't use parquet, leave away the wallpaper. Don't define whether it's housing or working, just call it atelier. It's also much better, because then you get the VAT back. And everybody who's renting in there now, including ourselves, can count atelier, it's for working, can count it against the tax. So you pay less tax, the building becomes 19%, it's 19% VAT in Germany, it becomes cheaper, and you can do whatever you like, you can work and live. And I think that's a very important part, that buildings should be more open to the kind of use. You can build walls if you like to, but it's not us who do it, and so everybody can keep on building inside. So it's very different things in gallery, atelier, working space, office, housing. Well, it's a very cheap facade, I have to say. It's polycarbonate, it's 100 euro a square meter. Jean-Philippe's is even cheaper. But we use this with 10 chambers that like heat cold wise. It's functioning very well. Yeah, but it's, and we don't have the sun from everywhere. It's sort of freestanding. And what you can see that it's used, no, it's like, it's the most beautiful building, one of the most beautiful buildings in Berlin, I would say. Look at this, so it's getting nighttime, you see there's something going on. And the architects are the last ones, maybe that's...
Maybe I have to add that it's not only beautiful, but it's comfortable. That's what is so surprising in this project. It's really comfortable. Now let's start the game. I think you prepared like a couple of questions. So I think we have an order. Oh, no.
I just would add before.
Yes.
It's more than comfortable. It's luxurious.
Yes.
And it was about 1,000 euro a square meter, and it's a hedonistic temple. No, it's so great inside, and you can have it for 1,000 euro. But there's one problem: if you do it as an architect, for 1,000 instead of 2,000 euro, you only gain half of it, and it's double work. So it's completely stupid as an architect to do something like that.
Okay, who is starting?
So I'm starting.
You're starting.
So my name is Elise Monceau, and I think that you've already part of answer to my question, but well, I'm going to ask it. So the question is, what about aesthetics? And because it has always been related to customs and practice, culture and topography, accordingly, we can say that it could be related to typomorphology. And nowadays, in response to globalization and maybe normativity, do you think that uniformization of aesthetics has to be applied to architecture? Is it inevitable? Is it necessary? And so, what are your approach of aesthetics in your projects?
It's a question to you.
No, what is incredible it is that we are in a system of globalizations where precisely all the normativity wants to create some regulation standards for all the world. Now the new buildings built in around Madrid are exactly like the one made in Amsterdam or in Rotterdam. So it is a sort of standard. And what I think the big challenge for architects and what is exciting and what we have seen with the Arnaud's project, it is that we have to deal with very precise situations. So, and what is interesting, it is the adaptation all the time and the transformation each time of this system of standards to precise situations. So precise situations that are political situations, geographical situations, climatic situations, economical situations, some existing, that it is that transform immediately these tools that the standards gives, but by the transformation each project becomes exciting and interesting. And it is this precisely this adaptation to this extremely precise context that I feel is the biggest challenge for architects. And for that, and you have seen that with these examples, you need this sensibility of understanding, of listening, of looking at precisely a situation, something that you cannot see if you stay in your office, but you need to go in the place, you need to feel the climate, you need to meet the people, you need to see the branches, you to see how it moves when there is a lot of wind. And it is this precision that is really exciting and that makes the possible change of the standard. And then the standard is different.
But to add to that, that means you don't know how a project will look like when you start it. So aesthetics is not in the beginning, it's a result of a precise thinking that comes in the end. And I think if the thinking is nice, the project will be nice. You can rely on that. You will have a problem if you don't know the aesthetics in the beginning. It means do a competition. And what they would like to see, how will the building look like? But in the normal time, for example, you do a competition, you can't research it all. You don't know it in the beginning because you need much longer. So how to deal then? So also in this kind of systematic way of asking architects for a very quick answer leads that they more and more have to go to a predefined aesthetics. And you can see it also here around, no? They had to show how it's looking like, so they can't make it too complex. A little green or a little whatever, so but don't make it too open as a process. And yeah, I really like the process.
Hello, I'm Aurélie. I would like pardon. I would like to know how you approach the design of the project. Does this happen in a more subjective way or by studying further the territory? Yeah.
Well, maybe just one word on this question, because I think the relationship between subjectivity and objectivity is really interesting, and it's of course related to the first question. It's more, for me, it's more between creativity and theory in a way than, because approaching a territory can be as well as subjective as well as objective in a way. You can, find more about data, but at the same time it can be with a lot of sensibility to approach a territory. But the relationship between subjectivity and objectivity is really interesting, as it is, because it's, maybe architecture is in a way as well as it is art, it is science, or it is neither art nor science. I mean, it's a sort of mixture between both. And I always say to my students that architecture is, I think it's not interesting when there's no reflection on it, then it's simple construction. But at the same time, architecture is not interesting if it's pure theory, in a way like Durand's plans, like, it's really dry and I don't know, it's not appealing. I think that when you see Arno's project, for instance, there's both in it, of course, and it's interesting because he's sometimes denying architecture, but I think he is a real architect. And that's in a way, so I think you have to, I think it's a condition to have a tremendous knowledge of theory, but it doesn't ensure you to make a good project, in a way. It's a condition, but it's not everything. And I think that, to add something to what Jean-Philippe said before, I think the problem in France, and especially in the School of Architecture, is that probably the aesthetic speculation is often in the beginning, or the project design is often reduced to this kind of aesthetic speculation, and it's not related immediately to whatever function or structure, but it's a very much more complicated process that Arno described before.
Or maybe let's put the question other way around. If you think that this kind of subjective way, this kind of sensibility means this great hero of an architect using a pencil, a soft pencil, doing this sketch, this genius of the first sketch, and that's it, then you failed it. That's stupid at all. But I think you were describing quite well, Jean-Philippe, a kind of double, not an either or, but an and. So as I understood you have a very objective way. Double size is better, and like a bigger envelope, as big as possible, makes sense. So that's objective. But then it's maybe not about subjectivity, but about sensibility, as you maybe. I think that's clearly your point to describe this kind of doubleness, this and.
It's when we started to work on collective housing and social housing projects, we see immediately that precisely the amount of regulation and standards based on this social housing was extremely complex. You had to earn 1/2 of square meters on the entrance, and then perhaps the living room could be 1/2 square meters bigger, larger. And in fact, all this standard, all this regulation, if you understand their cost, it's extremely expensive. It makes the project extremely expensive. And what we learn from the last 30 years, it is this very strange feeling that we have when we enter in what we call a loft. Something that was not built for the purpose of the function, but for something else. You go in a garage and you immediately say, okay, it's 5 meters too high, the ceiling, or it is 50 meters long, or it is too dark in the middle. And finally, you find this situation of comfort and easiness inside. So for us, to create first these questions of easiness seems very important. So it can be in an existing building or in an existing situation, or even if it is a new situation, you create your own loft. So you create the structure that could be there 50 years ago, and then you use it. So it's exactly the project of the School of Architecture of Nantes. We create the storage building that could have been there at the moment of the harbor, and we say then in these 30,000 square meters, the School of Architecture will install itself like a squat in the space. And then you have these conditions of simplicity, easiness. You see that for acoustic it's okay, for thermic it's okay, for disabled people it's okay. If the structure is 2 times more heavy to support, it's more easy. You don't have to make new foundation. You can directly support on each of the floors. So it is these conditions of easiness. You can find it very often in industrial buildings. But it's not a problem. It's not because you are not doing an industrial building. You can make a housing building, but you can use the tools of an industrial building. And this is this translation of some systems that are interesting. You can use the sophistication and the efficiency of this professional greenhouse technology that is generally used in the fields, and you can take it for the Palais de Tokyo or for another project. And this is this mix that is interesting.
And maybe a second answer. So as you were describing, you had to calculate 1/2 square meter off the entrance, and then you could add it to the living room. So that means you have to go deeply in the regulations of, for example, for a social housing standard, size-wise. And as you are not trained in the logic of greenhouses here in the architectural schools, you have to do that beside, because nobody tells you. There's no lecture, I'm sure, on the conditions of greenhouses. So you don't know how to use it. Though it means you have to research more the laws, the social housing standards. It's a lot of, let's say, also pain, and I know a lot about that pain, because to getting in that, and I haven't learned it at school, and to be honest, I never went to when it came to legislating lectures. It was morning 7:30, I never went there because it was the most boring topic. But in the end it turns out that all this is part of something you have to have in your toolcase, and even more, no? Like greenhouses, you started to develop it and test it, and that's also maybe something, it's also about testing. You don't know exactly whether it will function, but you know that you can regulate it, that you can use some other shading, And where does this idea come from that we architects have to deliver such a complex product to be ready when we hand over the key? It's not a car that's produced 100,000 times. So it should be completely normal that we have, let's say, the first half year to test on it, to make little improvements, to learn also about the house.
Next question.
Yes. Hello, my name is Marie Vincent. I'm a third-year student here in the school. And my question is to Jean-Philippe Vassal. In your conference at the GSD, you developed with Anne Lacaton your ways of thinking architecture, in which cheap is more. But in the meantime, you also talked about the importance of ornaments. And in this case, shouldn't you opt for crude aesthetics, as Arno Brandlhuber used to say?
No.
No, it's clear that first I already explained that the working on the economy is to make the things easier, so to make the situations bigger or with more capacity, and then to feel more comfortable in it in terms of your own freedom or the freedom you could develop for the users. But after that, you have to know precisely as an architect at what point you have to stop. For example, in the Palais de Tokyo, when you are making a space for artists, you can consider that the artists, when they will come, they will do the attractivity of the situation much better than you can do. When you make a flat, very often, you can see that if you are thinking that it could be red, the user, when it will come, he would prefer blue or green or that. So for some situations, you can consider as an architect, when you have given the maximum of facilities, of freedom for the user, it's enough and you can go away. In some other situations, for example, I showed two projects in London or in Guangzhou in China. It was interesting I am also fascinated by statue and by giant statue. It was interesting to say that the statue today could be something else than something that could be on top of the roof, but it is something that could be as an inhabitant living inside. So this work on the economy, this work on the easiness, this work on the maximum capacity allows you inside these buildings to place this giant goat statue in Guangzhou, which is 62 meters high, and that creates a sort of systems that will create a sort of paradox, a situation, a contrast between the empty space and precisely this element inside. So this question of decoration for us is very important, because when it is necessary, you have to do it. When of decoration or sense or creating emotion or creating feelings or creating surprises, I think this is a very important part of the work of the architect. But sometimes it's necessary, sometimes could not, it depends.
May I ask a little more precisely, because the ornament, for example, in the social housing is much more handed over to the user. No, they would make it blue, red, one has a carpet, the other not. So it's about the variation that comes into by the user. But the sculpture is a classical top-down decision, no? Who decides on the goat, for example, in the Chinese project?
It's completely our decision. So, for example, the goats in Guangzhou, it is because the city was founded a very long time by 5 goats that came from the sky and go down and spread some elements, and then the city that was a desert becomes very luxuriant, and it is a sort of symbol of the city. And for this museum, it was important to come back with this symbol, and as architect to propose this contrast and this connection and of these two systems of very, very floors like the Neue Galerie in Berlin, and suddenly one system. It is also the fact that at one moment it is important to take the modernism as a tool, but also to keep on going in one direction, and to give this new possibility, these new feelings that you can create, and these new contextual situations.
So it's about, let's say in modernism, we don't make it too complicated now, but there is no narrative embedded, no? Then just like the better future or whatever. So then it's more about adding a narrative, like a starting point for a narrative in that building with the code, no?
Yeah, it is to create a new history for related with the purpose of this building and related with the history of the city, in order for the visitors to see some pieces of exhibitions, but in the same time to be inside and to think about this element, this statue that you never see from outside, but you can see by fragments inside the building.
Would you still call it an ornament, or an? Because it's more about the narrative. It's not the ornament that lost that. It's like a crime. It's something else. No, it's like reloading the modern idea with the narrative, or like tracing back. But
it's not really an ornament, but it is, yes, something that it cannot work without.
I have a question to you. Why do you think that my buildings are crude? I think no, it's like there's a very nice American word I didn't invent. It's like brutiful.
Beautiful.
It's very brutiful. So that's also an ornament, but no?
Because I heard you speaking about it in a conference. That's why. Yes. So, next question. Pierre Le Guillon isn't here tonight, so I'm going to ask his question for him. How do you deal with the representation of your work? Is it important for you to control the way your architecture will be received through photographs you commission? To turn it into a different way, do you try to break in some way the standards of architectural photography?
No, it's a question to you, Arno. Actually, for you, because because all the because I'm just giving. I mean, I'm letting him work. Usually, the photographer, but you always. It seems that you have an idea on the pictures, as they're all. It's always bad weather on the pictures, no? Or at least the sky is always white. And maybe it has something to do with the beautiful. I ask myself, as usually, because we always look for a sort of picturesque situation. The weather is nice, the sky is really important. There are birds flying on the house, but you never see this kind of picturesque kind of context or atmosphere on the photos. So.
Representation is a kind of really difficult one, because, let's say, architectural magazines tend to be really porno, no? They always go directly to the middle, the nicest view, like with a wide angle, and what would they show? More or less, I don't know, more or less nothing. And if you think back of the process we described, so how do you embed in a photo the whole process is what's into developing the project? So what I like most, let's say there's two reasons for the gray sky. If the sky is already ugly, then the building looks nicer. But it's also give the photographer, I always ask him to stay there, to spend time, to use the sauna, to invite friends, to start to live in there and to come up with something private. But it's rare that it's functioning. And I think this question of representation is also a reason maybe why we are here and try to explain it. But I have to say, though, one of your exhibitions, I didn't see it in the Dam in Frankfurt, but a small part came to Berlin. And it was looking like the photographs were made by the users, even if it's not right, but it was not about the representation of the building, like a nice outside view, another nice outside view, and a nice detail. It was much more about how they furnished their spaces, and to show that it's about this liberation to use, no?
I think what is extremely important, it is this idea of housing or inhabiting, to being inside. So it means and very often in the architectural reviews you see an object. We don't want to produce object. We want to, Arno was saying, we're interested in a process of research, of thinking, that at one moment creates a situation. But this situation at this moment is when we have finished to work, is not really finished, because the situation is still inhabited by some students or some inhabitants or some users, etc. And this living situation is for me the most interesting. So it's perhaps 5 years after or 10 years after. Now we have some reports from the School of Architecture of Nantes, for example, and we see it always extremely different. The first house La Tapie was 25 years ago, and still we have sometimes some images of how the house is today. And this is interesting. So it's not a process that it is finish at one moment. The Palais de Tokyo, for each exhibition, for each month, there is something different. So each month there is a new Palais de Tokyo appearing. And this is, for me, what is interesting. I think architecture has to be built. Architecture, and we have to be inside it. We have to live in. We have to, it's a living object. This is extremely important. And even before the construction, we are very, I learned that with Jacques Andelat in Bordeaux. He was always saying that it's not necessary to draw when I am not sure of this line, because he was thinking all the time that the project was building and constructing inside your mind with real images and real reference and real souvenir and memories of some spaces. And it is a sort of assemblage of plenty of fragments of situations that you have already lived, perhaps in other countries or in other situations, that step by step are coming close to one to another, and at one moment produce something. And you don't need any photo, you don't need any model, you don't need any drawing to do that. You can do that only with what you have in your mind, with your imagination, and the way in your mind to try to make this special assemblage that you will fit extremely precisely and delicately to an existing situation. And this is this confrontation of these little fragments, little drops of water or little clouds that will progressively go to the site in order to take the richness and the precision of the site and make this assemblage of fragments. So for me, it's really a sort of cinematographic processus, like a filmmaker would create a film around a story with some actors. And as an architect, I try to do the same with some actors that sometimes I know, sometimes I don't know, but I could imagine who they could be and how they could walk and run and live in the space that I am doing.
So the cinema comparison gives me an opportunity to another answer. And maybe also to relate to what you said, the narrative where we was talking about with your sculpture. I think the naming of a project for us became important. For example, the towers you saw in Lichtenberg, when we first tried to get some money from the bank, they said, you are crazy guys, old towers of industrial site. Then we called the project San Gimignano Lichtenberg. And then the whole perception changed. And the bank said, okay, San Gimignano Lichtenberg, that sounds like a great project. So, and they gave us the money. So maybe it's functioning on different levels. It's not only the photography. And I have to say, if this house with the holes would be called house with holes, it might have been not so, let's say, it's not so widely distributed than being called anti-villa. And this kind of a strange combination that is big like a villa, but something is not functioning like in a villa, that help people like to read the images with a kind of with different glasses somehow. So I think it's happening on different layers, and I have to tell you, when we in 2000 we made a project and we become somehow well known, and then it's going down. It's always in these waves. But what's interesting at that time, we asked two composers, like one were really in the field of, let's say, very popular music, like electronic and the other like a Stockhausen-trained hardcore composer. And we just asked them for translations of the building, because we thought if a building is not able to tell more than just the image of it, then we should stop architecture. And so it has to be something that can be handed over to the next one, to the next cultural producer. And then it happened more. One made like a project on mirroring, and I didn't show the project, so I keep it simple. And it was sold in bookshops, maybe, let's say, 200 copies. The others made a sound sample of all of the 12 units and made like a fancy, nice, and even the cover was like our building, and then they sold like 25,000 copies. And we got the first interview in English from the Rolling Stone magazine. And then we discovered if you want to sell an architectural publication on your work, you might sell 2,000, maybe 3,000. But if you sell like audio, and they transport as well the image, but as a side effect, then it's like much more distributed. So representation is not so easy, in a kind of...
Yeah. I think what is interesting, it is any building should tell a story. I come back to Jacques Andrat. He was talking about mythogénèse, as a genèse by a myth, by creating a myth, creating a story. And even sometimes when the story was not existing, he was creating a false story. And he was writing this false story in marble. As anything could be written in marble should be right. And this was the foundation of the building, in fact, much more than the real foundation that go in the ground. It was to tell the story, to make this interest and this attractivity to this building or to this space by something that could happen there.
And it's also representation does not start when the building is finished. So, for example, to build this goat hill, this is widely known now. These guys built a goat hill before they even start building. Okay, the buildings are existing, but to start with goats, so therefore I'm quite close with your sculpture, can help a lot. And that means that representation is not longer a representation, but it's a presentation in the beginning. And that this reverse moment of it might, I think it's interesting.
Next question.
Thank you. So my name is Camille Ciotta. I study here, and earlier this year we had this wonderful chance to have Sauto di Moa, and you talked a lot about architecture and engineering, and I thought his answer was quite amazing. So I'd like to ask you the same question. Basically, how does technical knowledge affect your creativity, and how do you deal with it? I mean, is it like a core of your project, or well, just? When I first thought about this question, I thought about your work, Mr. Hedwig, but I see now that I can extend this question to all the lecturers.
First of all, I would like to reply, what do you mean by engineering or engineers? Because we have to deal with a very wide range of engineers today. They are becoming much more powerful than maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, engineers, do you mean structural engineers? Because we have to deal with, I don't know, green engineers and flux engineers and sometimes infrastructural engineers.
I was talking about the scale of a building. So.
Okay.
Structure engineering. But I saw your work as IMR and...
No, of course. I think it's a very interesting, maybe a funny story. When I arrived in Versailles as a German, very young professor there, and they didn't know me, and they said, okay, he's German, So he has to teach like architecture and structure and technical aspects. And I was never, that's why I was really surprised when I saw your question, because I was never really interested in structural aspects or matters. It's really interesting. Maybe it was the Freudian answer to your question would be that my father was also an architect, and he was very much concerned about technical and structural questions, and he was almost denying like special aspects, and I was much more interested in special aspects, and especially in concerns like about topologies. But it's true, we discussed it today during lunch with Arno. It's true when you do this kind of landscape architecture, I mean not landscape architecture, but landscape architecture, then of course you cannot avoid the question of the structure. And it's interesting because the project I showed, because there are a couple of projects about this kind of landscape architecture. The first one, we worked with a very good engineer here, and I think we have to get again into this sort of dialogue, very productive dialogue from the beginning on with engineers. And it was interesting because he proposed, there's not a real column, there's not a heavy structure, but he proposed like 28 very thin, like steel structures on the facade, and they allowed us even so to put the windows on it. And here, for this one, we try to avoid any structure at all. I mean, it's just the ceiling who's supporting the whole project. So he is approaching it with a sort of parametric design. And I don't know anything about this, but it looks, the first solutions he was showing us were really interesting.
I have the feeling that technically everything is possible. You can do what you want, but you need as an architect to have to give the starting point of the structure, of the economy, of the thermic conditions, etc. After that, you can work with different engineers, specialists in different. But as an architect, you give the impulse on each situation to the economy, to the structural system, to the thermical situation, etc. And because you have to precisely to define what is the most interesting way, and after that to see what is the best specialist that could fulfill this question. But I think that we precisely on this question of economy and structure or climatic regulations, we should start first as architect to define the best situations. And this was just what is interesting here for this example. It is just the combination. It's just the basement. It is just prefab concrete structure with columns, beams, and floors. So how to produce a floor of 2,000 square meters in the most efficient way as possible. And in fact, the dimension of the structure of this concrete structure is totally depending of the horticultural greenhouse that is on top, which is standard elements of 6.4 meters. So it means that if you develop 3 of them, you will have 19.2 meters of depth for your flat. And you could say that 2 of them will be used for insulation space, and another one would be taken as a winter garden. So what is interesting, it is not the basement system only, it is not the horticultural system only. What is precisely interesting, it is the mix of the two and the addition of the two. And it is this system that I was talking about fragments, how you can have fragments in mind that you know that they are efficient and play and work with them.
I think you already answered about that question, but I'm still gonna ask you this. Regarding the project you did in Mulhouse, Monsieur Vassal, you proposed greenhouses. However, legislation did not allow it, and you had to prove the thermal performances of those greenhouses using calculation. And the project was finally built as intended. So my question is, why are we so afraid to innovate?
It's because also, I come back to this, it is my intuition that I already practiced some structures in concrete, like you see for the basement, and I knew how they were reacting with the sun or with the cold. I already practiced some situations with these greenhouses, so it is really with this information that I could feel with my body precisely in some situation that I worked for this project. And we were quite sure that the result of these two things, working with the passive energy on one point, but also the inertia of some structure, should combine and create good condition for housing. Better than a simple greenhouse, or better than a simple concrete building. But the two altogether should have a good result. When we propose that to the engineer, he says, no, it's impossible. It's not fitting to the regulation, etc., etc. So he say it doesn't work. It's too transparent. It is not so enough insulation, etc. So we were a bit embarrassed. And with the client, we say, okay, there is a big meeting each month that is in La Défense, which is commission, I don't know in English, commission de dérogation à la RT 2000. At this time it was this. So it's some 10 or 12 engineers, best in France, that are making a meeting each month, and where people, the architects, they can come and say, this is my problem, what should I do? So I come there with the client and I show my project, and they say, but your project is a very interesting, it's a solar project, it should work, etc. The problem there was no software, there is no program that could calculate it. So then very complex, we make some very complex situation, and now we can see that the calculation can be more and more precise. We can see sometimes that with this intuition, you can be much more precise than just by fitting some systems of softwares or programs and we see this evolution, this extension of the precision of the systems. So at the beginning it was not possible to take in account a winter garden. Now it is possible. Before it was not possible to take in account curtains just behind the glass. Now it is possible. So what is interesting, it is that you can see that also step by step, by pushing the limits to the regulation change. So it's not the fact that you are always constrained under the constraints of the regulation, but as an architect, you can make the regulation change. And this is what is interesting with all this project that we have seen, that in fact, we are not just to have to be sad with the regulation. No, precisely by pushing them, we can make it changing, because we have some responsibility. We know that we are going in a positive and good sense direction. So when we think the regulation is not fitting precisely with these elements, we can work against and try to change it.
That seems very interesting that you have this board, let's say, of specialists that could be asked if there is this case. We don't have that in Germany. And I think if we come back to the question whether we should learn by producing buildings, that means we are overcoming the norm, because the norm can only describe what was existing to the moment when the norm was written. So anything new cannot be part of the norm. And that's, but we don't have this commission, which is rather interesting. And I can tell you, with this curtain we used in this anti-villa, we did a calculation, because for sure the hot air and the cold air can't mix so quickly. So you produce a kind of temperature difference from 8 degrees just with the curtain. if you are heating permanently inside and it's not insulated outside, it's 8 degrees. And we made a calculation on that, because you have to prove by calculation normally before you are allowed to build. And what happened then, we calculated it, we published the calculations, and then there was a sentence changed, not in the law, but how you should use the law, that now materials that have less than 2 centimeters are not allowed to use in calculations. So now in Germany we can't use curtains anymore for this kind of questions. Or people now have to trace back to our project that it has been allowed once, so we just follow their example. And I think that's really a systematic question. How can we learn in normativity, in adapt?
And I think we can learn from the experience. If you experiment it, you can use it. If you see that it exists there in this greenhouse, or it exists this in this building, or if it exists this, you can take this fragment of it, you can take this fragment and use this experiment. And then you can work on this possibility to make it fitting with the calculation or the regulation. But if you have the insurance that with these things that you can really experiment in terms of energy savings, in terms of comfort, in terms of pleasure, and if you work with these elements, you are quite sure to go in the right direction. I remember on another situation in the Palais de Tokyo, I just talk about that. The main difficulty was that this structural concrete structure made in the 30s, engineers say fire resistance 0. So we say it's not possible, 0, it should fall, or if you light your match. Okay, so perhaps there is something. In fact, because in fact inside the beams of concrete you had the steel that was too close to the surface of the beam. So in case of a fire, it should not be this possibility to stand during 1 hour. But then the question was, what is possible to be inside this museum that could burn during 1 hour? Nothing. Nothing. It's not possible on 3,000 square meters to imagine that you can have a product inside the building that could burn during 1 hour. So, and this method, which we call is a sort of virtual simulation of fire, of fire reality, is used for car parks, steel construction car parks. So it means that you have car parks in steel, which is normally fragile, and then you have plenty of cars with the fuel inside, and they can burn. And they demonstrate that this can resist by this kind of method. The problem then is say, yes, but it is cars. It is extremely burnable. What happens with modern art? And then, effectively, we could imagine that it could much less problematic, but in fact, it could also be more problematic. So we have to work on statistics. So we went to the FNAC, the National Center of Contemporary Art, and we take 1,000 art pieces, and we make a category in function of how much it could burn. And we take 10 of them, and we make the study of what these 10 elements could done for the structure in the Palais de Tokyo, and nothing was happening. And then it was possible to leave the concrete structure as it was, with a study of 30,000 euro, but avoiding 1 million euro of protection of fire structure. So it means that it is much more interesting at one point. It was extremely interesting to see these engineers working on totally crazy art pieces by artists, and to see how the beams could resist to this kind of fire. And it was applied like that.
I can add a story too. I showed you this house where you have, it's in the ground floor, it's a glass house. You have 50 meters, linear meters of a glass facade, which is 150 square meters of a glass facade. And the structural engineer, he told me, we do not fulfill the condition. It's illegal. We don't get any permission, because the relationship between the transparent surfaces and the untransparent surface cannot be from 0 to 100. It's impossible. So he calculated it with like a wall, a closed wall to 1 meter. It's still today illegal. This is the dossier he handed in, and to get the permission. But actually, the reality is completely different. My client, he told me that sometimes it's even minus 15 degrees outside in winter, and the heating is switching itself off because the sun energy, the natural energy, is heating like enough the interior space, and it's very comfortable. And actually the problem is not the heating, the problem is the cooling in the summer with a glass facade. But there's no norms for this kind of houses. So it's really, it's kind of, you know, you have to sometimes project something which is not perfectly legal.
No, but it is. The project that you show, Arno, is very interesting. It's this house with the curtain and this place, the foyer in the middle, where you know that it is warm, and it is totally different as a feeling, as a sort of systems where everything is heated at the same temperature, and in a way, it refers to old farms where you had a cheminée. And you can go to the cheminée, and people were happy to be around the cheminée. This is about comfort, also, and pleasure. Mm. And why it's no more possible to have this kind of possibility? So it's no more a cheminée, but probably it is something else, a oven or something else. But you know that there is a place where it is more warm, and you have some places where it is more fresh. And then you can choose. You are inside, and you have this pleasure and possibility and freedom of going to the place which is the most interesting. For me, this is about luxury. This luxury of being able to choose the space where you want. So in summer you will go close to this because it is in the shadow. In winter you go to here in the night because it's warm just around. When there is a ray of sun in winter, you go close to the window because you will have the sun making warm. It is these very simple things. It's very simple things, in fact. And you can do with that, and you can work with that and create very interesting situations with that. So I think it's important to remember that. I remember that on my grandmother's house in the countryside, and it was really attractive and interesting.
Okay. Shall we, next question, or maybe the audience can feel free to ask a question, or what do you think? Because we are... How many? Two more? Okay, come on, let's go.
School closes at midnight, so...
Yeah, no, but we have a table, a reservation for... And I'm really delighted by your resistance. This one is a quick one. This one is a quick one, yeah. Who is...
A quick one, so... Lance Loravet, currently student here also. I'd like to hear more about Berlin. All three are very concerned by this city. Mr. Hedvecht briefly introduced the subject during his speech. He talked about historicism in the city center of Berlin. I would like to know your opinion in general about the urban city policy in Berlin. And of course, I'm thinking about a huge example is the ongoing reconstruction of the city castle, the Stadtschloss.
Okay, if we use the definition that architecture is ordering social relations, we'd all agree, no? Architecture is ordering social relations. Reconstructing the Stadtschloss means also to reconstruct feudalistic situations. I'm not interested in going so far back in history, in my personal freedom, so that's completely stupid.
Maybe I can say one word about this palace of Berlin, because as maybe you don't know all the story of this palace, and in 2 words, it was a building that has been destroyed in 1950 by the Communist Party, who considered it as a symbol of the Prussian monarchy. And now it's under reconstruction. Can you imagine to reconstruct a building after 65 years of its destruction, which is really weird. So we would have preferred to see the reconstruction, I don't know, in Las Vegas or in Disneyland. This would be probably have been the right place to do so. But I think we are really relaxed with it now. The fight is over. Now it's really, I showed one slide, because now the next war is about the area which is next to the Palace of Berlin, and this we have to fight against. This
I have to say, reconstruction, it's not only the Stadtschloss we reconstruct, it's a kind of German disease. Sorry for that.
East European disease.
What is strange, it is because I was really interested by the situation before the demolition of the Place de la République that was precisely at this place. What is really sad, it is the disparition and the demolition of this Place de la République, because it was really a sort of Centre Pompidou that was really interesting. So there was some asbestos on the elements, but after 1 or 2 years of cleaning, there was steel that I never see so clean in my life, and there was no more any asbestos there, and it was incredible, and it was used by plenty of artists. It was a center of art that was extremely interesting, and it was totally crazy to imagine that this new ground could not be used, and why should we lose that just to rebuild that? So perhaps rebuild it, but keep the first one. So it is this idea of addition, always adding, but decided to take away some elements. That was also, I think, many Berliners were really proud of it or interested by it. Is really sad situation, and we have a sort of so it's a different situation. But when we see the demolition in the suburbs, it's just a vision that we have from far away, and we never know the families living inside, even sometimes with a lot of difficulty, what is their attachment to these places. And this has to be really taken in consideration. And precisely also to try to improve the situations by addition instead of demolition. And it was, for me, extremely sad to see that in Berlin, because we are always thinking that it would be possible to avoid. But this sometimes is very heavy in Germany. It was clear that it was not possible.
And even more, like our airport is not finishing, because we somehow didn't... I would have been so happy if that would happen to the castle reconstruction, but this one is really into time.
Yes, and in the budget.
And you have to say for sure it's ideological warfare. No, it's a warfare against the East, because that was so present in the middle of Berlin, and let's say it was not a reunification. So we, the West, had to prove that we can remove the trace of the East. It was also very much an ideological debate. Sure. And it was one of the rare cases that the Bundestag, so in a representative democracy, decided 4 times for the Stadtschloss. It's completely crazy. Next question.
Oh, wow. Just the first part, maybe. First part?
Just the first one?
Yeah.
Okay, so just the first one, because we are short in time. My name is Nathan Miller. So my question is, you work both in France and in Germany. How can German architecture improve the French practice in technical, legislative, and architectural terms?
May I add, you can see there a question coming further down. Transparency is often present in your architecture. What aim and signification does it have for you? Example, Brunnenstraße studio house in Cologne. But also if we go, I would just, as to answer the first question, I just show you 2 images of added architecture, which is from the very good young studio called June 14, Semcha Mayev and Johanna Meyer-Grobbrügge, who made the first add-on to Brunnenstraße. So this, you see, that's Brunnenstraße, there's a strange roof. It was looking like that, and then they added something really nice, very transparent, and I would like to put that in as the whole answer. It's a transparent sauna. It's very small, though it's not insulated, and it's very nice to use, especially night times. And so,
it's really. I have to test it. I think it's about these differences that could have. I think anywhere you have different, like a different ground, like a different climate, like different people. What is interesting, it is, I don't know if there is less or more regulations or there are more stuff. Everywhere is different, and you have to do with that. And I think it's part of this interesting challenge for architects. So to adapt, to have this capacity of adaptation.
I think you can't say nothing more after this kind of slide, or no? No, it's. I mean, it's. Maybe there's a last question from the audience. Je suis assez épaté. Il y a quand même la moitié qui a résisté.
Just 1 second.
There's a micro.
A very practical question for the German architects. What will you do for the 4 million people that are coming to your country? And you said you wanted to mix housing and work. Is it the return of the Mietskasernen in Berlin?
Okay. Do you work at your private space at home as an architect doing your student work? So you in your own apartment, which is designed to be just living, you also work in. So that's just this question. On the other hand, we have like, I give you 2 answers on the refugees. We will have 4 million more refugees. 2 answers. One is like, we have 1.7 million empty apartments in Germany. We have 1.7 million empty apartments. So divided by, so that's 3 refugees per apartment. Where is the problem? So if you take it, if you bring it back to ownership and the use, and no, there is no housing problem on that point if you have 1.7 million empty apartments. On the other hand, I would not like to follow just creating refugee camps. It's also us that have to learn that our standards are maybe too high. So when I grew up, or even when you think back to the grandmother of Jean-Philippe, it's the same situation with my grandmother. For sure, it was not the same standard than today, and maybe their kids were not disabled for their future. So maybe we can learn for ourselves that standards is not a solution for our social problems. And that means we should never create a homogeneous situation for refugees. But for sure, we should start designing things that we ourselves would like to live in, even if it's a lower standard, which means you have paid it back after 10 years and you're completely liberated afterwards.
Maybe we have a sort of idea as the Palace of Berlin is called in the future. I think the notion is the Forum of World Culture. So it would be interesting to offer the palace to the refugees that come to Germany. It could be a nice idea, no?
And I have to say, I'm not afraid at all of 5 million refugees. Let's say around 90 million Germans, 5 million refugees. It's like 1 refugee per 20 Germans. Where's the problem? Imagine the whole United States without refugees, without economic refugees in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. So there wouldn't be any United States without this kind of refugees. So
I just came back from the Lebanon, and there are 2.5 million refugees on 4 million Lebanese. So this is another situation.
And we don't we see it very often in Paris, but I think there is 30,000 homeless in Paris that live in the street, looking for some heat with the metro station, without any flat, nothing, no place to go. And I think 5 years ago there was this tents camps, and this is also a incredible, stupid question and problem in Paris. And this is something that means that we have to think precisely, not in general, but precisely to see how it is possible to try to find some answers for that.
And according to Jürgen Habermas, of course you can learn throughout history, and I think you can learn in France, especially in Paris or the greater region, when you see that Paris is probably the most monocentric and pyramidal city in the world, and that's why heterogeneity is so important to us, because as the sort of foreign cultures, let's say, we're never really integrated in the most, let's say, functional parts of the agglomeration, and that is probably the biggest social problem. Integrate them. I mean, heterogeneity doesn't mean just to mix, let's say, work and living space, but it also means like poor and the rich, and it also means the different kind of cultures, the different kinds of social backgrounds.
And it doesn't mean to be the same. It's still, the other is the other. We don't have to understand everybody. We do not even like that we are understood from everybody, no? You have a neighbor, you don't like him, it's okay you don't like him, but you don't have to shoot him. So, and if you think about all the data that's going on, though, the world is becoming bigger and bigger, faster and faster. So you have access to any information in the States, whatever, by internet, and do you really believe that the material is not coming and even people are not coming? We can't avoid it. We can't protect ourselves by Schengen or whatever, that they won't come. You can't build an architecture so strong or border so strong that it will not happen. So it's just completely stupid to think about that we can avoid it. If you cannot avoid it, then how to deal with it? It's only a question about how can we support it.
Okay, thank you very much.